How would you like it if your life had all the shots being called by a 5-year-old? I'm not talking about parenthood, which is a very real thing, I'm sure. I'm actually talking about emotional maturity. How would you feel if every time you had to deal with a challenge, you weren't able to think logically and rationally about something because you had to operate through a more emotionally reactive kind of approach where you didn't have a full or nuanced understanding of how things were working? Sounds chaotic, doesn't it? Sounds kind of ridiculous too. But here's the thing. That's kind of what we do. And we do that through old beliefs we developed when we were young that are still operating in the background. Now, a lot of these beliefs that we've developed aren't really showing. They don't come up too much, and they might show a little bit of our quirks, but most are benign. They don't really impact us that much in our day-to-day. Some might be a little bit stickier, and so you might have a bit of an awkwardness in certain situations. But the beliefs I'm talking about today are the ones that can lead to a great deal of suffering and a great deal of pain. And in my own experience, it was the source of my own personal hell. So what do we do with beliefs like this? Well, we've got to understand and uncover them, and we've got to allow ourselves to heal from them, to let them go. But to do that is not as easy as it sounds. I started my journey with the belief that I developed when I was 5 years old. My belief is very simple. I do not matter unless a woman loves me. That's something I developed at the age of 5 in response to my parents' divorce. Prior to the age of 5 years old, I lived in what I would consider a very happy and healthy environment. I had both parents, their love and attention anytime I needed it. And so I was able to be myself to the best of my ability. That's what kids are here to do. But when I turned 5, everything changed. And suddenly I found myself feeling like I was in an environment of scarcity. Why? When my parents divorced, my single mother was in charge of me, my older sister, my younger brother. And she had to work part-time in order to help pay the bills. What does this mean for the world of a 5-year-old? It means the abundance of attention and love and appreciation that I was so familiar with getting, suddenly became scarce. It was hard to come by. And 5-year-old me was trying to make sense of the world. It wasn't based on reality. It wasn't based on a real understanding of the situation. As adults, we know divorces sometimes are the healthier option. But for me at 5 years old, all I knew was that it became harder and harder to get the attention I needed. And because my mother was the one that was present and there, it was her attention I needed most. You can see how a belief makes sense early on. It has a purpose. It may not be true or realistic, but it represents the world that we know. The thing is, these beliefs don't always go away as we age. They stay in the background and they keep running. And that's what happened with me. I was worried that I might actually die if I didn't have attention. As a 5-year-old, if you lose your caregiver's attention, if you're forgotten, your life's over. So for me, that belief was life or death. And because my mom worked part-time, I never really had that belief fulfilled. That left me in this kind of state of always wanting something I never really fully had. And as we age, our beliefs come with us. And when they come with us, they shift. They adapt to the world that we're in. And so when I became a teenager and I fell in love for the first time, that belief was operating, but it shifted who that woman was. It went from my mother to someone that became my partner. And that was the very first time I had the fulfillment, the belief that I had, what I always wanted, suddenly I had in droves. I had more than I could ask for. I had all the love and attention I could want. And where that put me was on the other side. My worth was infinite. I had everything I could have ever wanted. Such a wonderful feeling meant I suddenly felt incredibly charismatic and intelligent and social and motivated. I had all of these things about me that I loved. But you might also realize that in teenage relationships, they don't have a great track record of lasting it for the long run. And so it was also the first time I experienced the opposite side of my belief when we broke up, because that was the first time I had ever truly felt abandoned and alone. And I felt the exact opposite. What I felt was like I was going to die. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, but there was an impending sense of doom no matter what I did. Suddenly who I was didn't matter anymore. I didn't know what to deal with it, because here's another thing about beliefs that we have when we're young. We forget about them. I've told you what my belief was, but 20-year-old me did not know what I was going through. This is what I mean when I ask you, how would you feel if a 5-year-old was calling the shots in your life? Because I knew at 20, relationships end. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. I knew that there were plenty of fish in the sea. I kept telling myself all of these great things about moving on and getting better. And so you can imagine how surprised I was when I felt like I was getting pulled by the collar to feel like I might just die. Nothing I did mattered. I didn't matter. The pain was intense, and so after days turned into weeks, I hadn't gotten over it. I was in the worst shape of my life. All of this emotional pain was doing a number on me, and I couldn't handle it anymore. So I wanted an escape. And this is something we all do when it's a belief that we don't know how to deal with and it's too painful to feel through. We want to get away from it. What I did was I looked for a substitute for emotional pain, and I found it in physical pain. And I used my younger brother to get what I wanted. Now, he's my younger brother, but he's technically my big brother because he's about 6'5", and he's got about 200 pounds. So much bigger than me. And he's a soft, kind, and loving person, slow to anger, and doesn't like to fight. So I knew I was doing something wrong when I confronted him one night in the kitchen. I walked up to him, I started pushing him around, and I looked in his eyes. I said something I knew would make him see red, and I nearly collapsed when he bashed me across the face and pretty much broke my nose. It's hard to describe, but as I felt myself bleeding, I actually felt elation. I felt good. Suddenly, a pain I knew I could deal with. But that didn't last very long, because as soon as I looked back at my brother, I realized all of the pain and fear and confusion I had now put into him. He had now experienced doing something he didn't realize why. And that created a great deal of shame in that moment for me. I knew I had done something wrong. And in my own 5-year-old mind self, that 5-year-old I used to be, was so shocked at what I had done, I pretty much felt that I deserved to be worthless. Look what I had done. And so that's the way I chose to be. And what I did is I allowed myself to numb out completely. I shut down all of my feeling. This is a mistake that we can make when we deal with beliefs too. Is that we try and hide from the feelings, we try and run away, and when we can't, we shut them down. You think you're locking everything away inside, only to find out you've locked yourself on the outside instead. I didn't stay in that numb state for a day, not a week, not a month, not even a year. For 3 years, I was numb. I hadn't moved an inch, and because all of those feelings were still running rampant within me, I was starting to experience physical symptoms that were affecting me. I had long-term deep depression, social anxiety so intense I couldn't even be myself around my closest of friends. And the scariest one were the panic attacks I had from doing even the most mundane things. I couldn't sit in a restaurant for fear that I might just black out and faint. It got so bad that one day I woke up and realized just how close I was to my life being over. I realized I didn't care if I woke up again. The irony to that is that's what someone who feels worthless thinks they deserve. But the moment that realization got too real, it got me thinking. It got me moving. It got me to say, I need to do something. So I did. I looked all around myself. I saw nothing of value of which I could save and salvage. So I made a decision I think a lot of people make. I decided to move and go somewhere brand new. Start somewhere new, because maybe, just maybe, if I was somewhere else, things would be different. And I did. I moved. I went over to the West Coast, Vancouver, British Columbia. I called up my uncle and I said, hey, I'm having a hard time out here in my home in Ontario. Can I stay for a few weeks? To which he says, why don't you come on over? Why don't you stay for 3 months? That was the scariest thing I'd ever been offered, because I was so shut down prior to that, I was uncomfortable leaving my room. So the idea of moving to the other side of the country was a huge, massive, uncomfortable action. But often, if you want to deal with your beliefs, you have to do something that's uncomfortable, anything, just so you can get some fresh experience and start changing and challenging what you know. So I did. I moved to Vancouver, and that very first day, I remember feeling just overwhelmed, excited, nervous, you name it. Had I really left everything behind? Here's the short answer to that one. No, you can't run away from a belief. It lives inside of you. Anywhere you go, it will follow. But if you go, you might have a little while. There'll be some short term where everything's new. And so there, my uncle and I were on the very first day. We sat down in a restaurant overlooking English Bay. We had ordered food, and right after the server had left our table, I felt it. The beginnings of panic deep inside of me. My heart beat faster. My arms and legs felt cold as all the blood rushed to my core, and I knew very quickly my thoughts were going to overwhelm me. Normally what I'd do in this situation would be disconnect and hope for the best. Wasn't a good strategy, because that usually made it worse. But because the way I'd normally go would be to go home and hide, and since home was 5,000 kilometers away, I couldn't do that. I had to sit there. And so I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I stayed with the feeling. I stayed in that feeling, and I felt all of the sensations. And I'm not going to say that it removed my anxiety, but I noticed that an intense increase of panic began to slow and then plateau. And as I noticed it, it felt yucky, it felt heavy like mud, but it began to dissipate. And then the next thing I knew, it was gone. I can't describe how happy I was in that moment. I had overcome something that had left me paralyzed for years. It was this feeling in me where there was this massive appreciation for everything. When the food came, I savored every bite. I fell into laughter and conversation with my uncle, and I just took in how happy I was to be living, to be here in that moment. That was my first success. And the reason why it was so successful is because it was an action towards my worth without the need for somebody else. I didn't know that at the time either. But I was riding such a high, such a wild wave, that the next few days shouldn't surprise anyone. On day 2, I went for another dinner and met some new friends in Vancouver. On day 3, I started with the workout, went out to climb Grouse Grind with a group of friends, and met a really cute girl. I climbed the mountain, ended up going to a house party that night to watch the fireworks over English Bay, and she was there, we danced, and next thing you know, day 4, I was dating again. That sounds like a really great success story, but if you know my belief, you understand the trap I just fell into. I was starting to develop my own worth, and suddenly I found myself feeling like $1 million all over again, but it wasn't through my own actions, it was because someone else was there to love me. And so it's an exact repeat of what I had done, because within 3 short weeks, I went from feeling like $1 million to like my bank account hit 0. Because when that relationship, short, ended quickly, I felt exactly like I did from my first relationship. I don't mean similar, exactly. That's the first moment I knew something was up, and this is a really great way to start uncovering your beliefs. Because if you have very different situations, but the experience keeps repeating, now there's something going on. Wait a second. My first relationship, that one was 2 years. I thought it was so painful for me because we had built so much time and history together. This one was only 3 weeks. It's a fling at best. Why is it that I feel just as destroyed inside? I didn't know, But the fact that I had a second experience to back up my first one meant I had something to look into. It hurt like hell, but this time I wasn't able to disconnect because my curiosity was kicked in. Something here is different. But because it hurt so much, I needed to process. And so there I was in my uncle's apartment, curled up in the fetal position in a little chair, feeling. It's a scary and uncomfortable thing, but when you're open to your feelings, this is how you connect to your beliefs. Your beliefs are very emotionally charged, and they tell you all kinds of stuff. It's when we refuse to listen that they take over, and that 5-year-old starts calling the shots. So instead, I stayed connected and I listened. And through the pain and the misery, I started to notice other feelings, like grief and sadness for loss, appreciation for a relationship that was had, happiness, joy, laughter. I had processed. And eventually it got to a point where the feeling was done. And I actually saw for the first time the hollowed out version of my belief, the one that didn't have any power over me but was still in play. I realized my worth, if it depended on another person, was never going to be a good situation for me. But here's the hardest thing about beliefs. When it's time to let them go, even when you deal with all of the emotion, your belief is how you see the world. And so it feels like everything you know is going to disappear if you let this thing go. I couldn't do it. I had come so far, and at the very edge of my trip, my journey, I was still stuck. For 2 weeks, I sat on that couch. And when my uncle came home one day from work, he saw me there, and he'd been tired of seeing me there for way too long. And he said something I'll never forget. He said to me, "You can sit there as long as you need. You can feel sad, feel whatever you need to feel. But if you hurt that little boy, I'll kick your ass." And I mean that in the nicest way. I don't even know why, but in that moment I laughed. It might have been that there was a person that knew me from before that belief had come into play and knew who I was. And he wasn't going to take that kind of limiting belief. He wasn't going to take that kind of nonsense. And when I saw that there was someone in my corner fighting for me, it was the moment that I was actually able to let go. And it changed my life. I was able to move so much more quickly after that. Belief still shows up now, but it has no more power. I can put it away and let it go. And I hope for you that you are able to do the same. Thank you.